first, a Fox News alert. The ceasefire in Gaza is holding as Israeli troops pull back under the terms of the peace deal. President Trump is expected to arrive in the region tomorrow. Chief National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin is live in Tel Aviv with the latest. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Rich. We expect the president to arrive actually on Monday. That's when he will address the Knesset. Overnight, from Sunday to Monday, we expect the hostages, all living 20 hostages, to return back here to Israel in Hostage Square. They've been gathering families of the hostages. There's a lot of emotion here in Israel, and about 500,000 Palestinians have already returned to their homes in Gaza. Right now, I am joined by retired Major General Amos Yadlin, who served as the head of Israeli military intelligence for years. Amos has incredible experience dealing with Hamas, dealing with Gaza. Amos, let me ask you, why now? Why this deal was able to occur now?
I think the President of the United States, Trump, understood maybe better than the Prime Minister of Israel that it is time to end the war. He understood that the interest of Israel in the world, not in Gaza, in the world, the international standing of Israel is going down, that Israel is unable to beat this terror organization as long as they are holding the hostages, as long as they are using their own population as a human shield. And President Trump haven't awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace. But the people of Israel are now giving him the highest prize for the security of Israel, which is a prize in Israel that we are giving to those who contribute to the innovation and the contribution to the security of Israel. So the people here in Tel Aviv, 80% of them, felt that the hostages should come back first, and then we deal with Hamas. And the president got it.
What was the hardest part of the negotiations from what you heard, and what was the turning point?
The turning point was, I think, the attack in Qatar. And since the attack in Qatar, the president played with both sides. He has a wonderful, wonderful team. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner knew how to talk, how to bring everybody on board. The president delivered the prime minister, and Qatar and Turkey delivered Hamas. If you add to it, and this is to the credit of the prime minister, the military pressure in Gaza was effective, and Hamas understood that this is the time to end the war as well.
Do you consider this a historic deal?
I think we are only in the first stage. The 20 points of President Trump have three groups. One is well defined. Numbers of hostages, of terrorists that will be released from prison, a map on the withdrawal, 72 hours. This is already agreed, and this is important. But the second part is more important, because this will decide which narrative is the right narrative. If the international force and the Arab force, and what is written in the president points, that Hamas will not be in Gaza, not as a government and not as a military force, this will be historic. If the president will lose interest and Hamas will not disarmed, then we are again in the same problem that we have been in the last 2 years.
What happens?
How to dismantle Hamas.
And what happens if Hamas does not disarm?
I think we don't know all the side agreement. We don't know what are the guarantees that both sides get. I think Hamas got, and this was yesterday in the news, a promise from the president that the war will not come back. However, it is written unilaterally Israel cannot renew the war. But if there is a guarantee to Israel that if Hamas is not dismantled, then we can do what we are doing in the north against Hezbollah. When Hezbollah is acting against UN Security Council 1701, Israel is attacking. And this can happen if the second part will never happen.
Thank you very much, General Yadlin. Nobody knows more about Hamas dealing with Gaza than retired Major General Amos Yadlin, who's also president of Mind Israel. Rich, I'll throw it back to you. A lot of anticipation, a lot of excitement here in Israel, and then also the emotions are running very high in Gaza, not far from where we are right now.
So much going on, so many questions outstanding. Jennifer Griffin, great interview, and thanks so much for joining us from Tel Aviv.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.